does it mean for us to remain committed to our mission for over a century, and yet the need persists? Today, a conversation with Chief Community Impact Officer Kelly Batson on values, how we adapt, and what we can all do to create a lasting impact. Let's jump in.
So I guess I pose that to you. Like, why are we still
Why can't
here?
we fix this? Yeah.
I mean that I know I understand the need is there, but I mean, like, why, or have we made headway? And I know that we have the pandemic right now that's probably exasperating things, but I think even removing that, we're still dealing with rates of poverty that seem to be spiraling. I'm curious, after 100 years after us doing this, what do you think? Where do you think we stand with that?
So yeah, I was trying to think about, I asked you if I could just say it was racism and capitalism,
Which you can.
and colonization, or like I could probably get like whatever that looks like, but I mean, I think that's true, but like that's not enough. Something I thought of when I was just in the last 10 minutes realizing we were going to talk about this, I was like, why do I think that? And something I'm taking this training, the woman that does the training she's done like worldwide trainings, like with the UN around leadership. And she said something in the first day of training that says, a system delivers according to its values. And so I've just been like, what system did we build, right? And who benefits from it and who doesn't? And so and I know, and we've said this in many ways, right? Like policy or poverty is a policy choice, or, like we are making the choice for it to work this way and it's working the way we wanted it to, right? Or that we built it to. Wait, we don't want it to anymore. So like, I've been thinking a lot about that since that training in October, because I just feel like, oh yeah, and I think about it in all the little micro systems that we have too, just how my team operates, or how we, the United Way operates, or all of those things. Like, we're going to deliver according to our values. So I think if we think about all the systems that people live in, whether that's like the very big system like capitalism, or how people access resources and benefits, right? So if we have the system for people to access, maybe some like public benefits, people have to prove that they're in crisis, and people have to, and that's part of, I know the ambassador said that in the guaranteed basic income convening, like people are having to prove they're in crisis. You can't have any savings. You can't, right? Like, it's really not meant to help someone be successful. It's really meant to keep someone dependent on like, we've built that thinking people don't have autonomy or agency, or people don't, aren't trying. We're not building it with the mobility that we really want people to have in mind. So I just feel like every system is going to do that. And we built this system in that way, and at all the different levels, right? So I think that's at the core of it. And there's been moments, I think we make gains generally in like 100 years. We make gains when we change the system to really value the contribution of all versus the people in power. And so the more power we can distribute, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah.
I think those are when we have gains in really solving poverty, is when we value the contribution of everyone. Understanding that we haven't really prioritized making sure that wages for the lowest income folks are going up. So then people just continue to have to struggle to afford to, as costs go up, they're not able to meet that. Something that occurred to me is one of the key pieces to this puzzle was supposed to be this social movement. So the X factor, or like what was going to make this systems change, was going to be public policy. And I think that's really where you get that, in our mission, where we talk about dismantling the root causes. A lot of it is the capital P policy, like actual legislation, but also, like I said, maybe like your public benefit system and like procedural changes for policy, not, like how we do those types of services and supports for families who are currently struggling. I think it's changing both of those policies. But this other key part that really was sort of fascinating to me, that I do think might be a really promising way to think about it, is this social movement idea. When the majority of community realizes that their fate is tied together, that we all have a role to play, and we really you have to be actively pushing against it and fighting against poverty. Kind of like when everybody realized that tobacco was bad for you. And so it just kind of became this norm that you're like, this is not acceptable. We can't just let tobacco companies, sell to our kids. And even though that's, still happening, and that all still, we have lots of impacts from that still. But there's this idea that if we had a social movement big enough for everyone to recognize poverty is no longer acceptable, what would that look like? And I think that is partly why we're still here. Like, we haven't tipped the scale of people doing something differently. Maybe they know conceptually and, sort of intellectually that that's not a good thing, and they don't want that, and they don't want people to hurt like that. But are they doing something about it? Right? Because it's not going to be United Way doing this alone.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
it has to be a movement, not just a thing that, a handful of us work on for years and years. So,
Well, that's interesting. And I kind of want to play a little bit of devil's advocate then, because, even with your example of like tobacco, right? Tobacco is still doing it.
Right. True. Yeah, we did win.
Yeah. Like and I think maybe even most recently, I know that we voted to not allow the sale of flavored tobacco in California, right? So that is arguably that's a win. That's a step forward, but that's just happening now, as opposed to like how many years has that taken, and we're still operating in a system, to your point, a system that is designed to still ultimately kind of benefit big tobacco. And so I guess what I wonder then is, like, poverty is not a new issue in the Bay Area, and it takes on slightly different forms over the decades, but it's not new. And so this social movement that we're talking about, I mean, did we just not realize that our fates are that tied? Is there an inherent, like, the way that the system of the Bay Area is designed specifically leans to an inherent feeling that, yeah, that's bad, and maybe there's a drag on the system in some areas, but it doesn't really affect me as long as I'm not seeing it. And then when I see it, it affects me because I have to see it.
Right. Or like a pandemic has to happen, and now I'm like, oh crap, all the people who were struggling, like who were frontline essential workers, are the ones struggling the most and getting COVID the most, and in the hospital the most, and dying the most. And yeah, you're right. I mean, you're right. And maybe I think it's not a good enough excuse or whatever to say these things take time. But it struck me, like, who is in the movement around tobacco, right? And tobacco is I mean, it's not, it's not apples to apples, but I'm just thinking, like, I wonder if it's who is part of that movement. Does that make a difference? Right. It's the people in power, but it's the people who want to regain their power. And the people with lived experiences. Like, if that started a movement, would that look different than, like, waiting for the people at the top to realize we can't, we shouldn't let people smoke this much or have or whatever, we should put rules in place. So I don't know. That's just sort of what struck me when you're asking the question, but I don't have a good answer for that. As a society, we haven't decided that the system should have different values yet, right? Like, people want more money, people want more things, people want more power. They think it's a zero sum game, right? If I have to give something, if other people win, someone has to lose, and that is
well, but that's capitalism, right?
Right. So
until
that is not our value,
capitalism,
right? And that is how our system works right now, right?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't have to be true. Like I say, it's not a zero sum game, but it is. Right now, until, like, if we had a different value around that, could we actually change? Would we have a different system? And would the movement move faster? Would it be like a snowball? That really is a radical way to think about it.
I mean, what does that look like to you? Radical transformation in a perfect world, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's really about centering community first and having that drive us instead of us driving it. And I don't know if that's that radical. There's so many organizations that do that kind of work. I do think there's more value in the part where we partner with others We do nothing alone. We do everything in partnership. And I think that that is key, right? It's not just about starting your nonprofit to serve this one need. It's looking around and seeing who has the strengths and the assets and what can we add. Let's look around and see what's happening and see how we can be helpful. We don't have to start a new thing. We don't have to, take all the credit. We just want the impact to happen. So how do we do that? I think there's a lot of values where like we plug into places. And so I think more partnership and collaboration, but with more intention and with more like strategic thinking about what parts of the system can we have impact on that might make a change, like so that we're not doing this 100 years from now.
I mean, like, how are we addressing those the root causes? Like, and what are those? And like we say root causes a lot, but I wonder, in your view, like what are some of those? I mean, I know you said like racism, like
right.
system,
Yeah.
But really, like, how does that play into the system where it directly affects poverty? And then how do we actually intend on addressing that? Because racism is big, right? Like, that's a big,
yeah.
Like, how are we going to cure that?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the how, it's probably policy and advocacy work. Like if you think about how, obviously, I think housing feels like a really tangible way to talk about what some of these like root causes in terms of like racism and capitalism and what those did to marginalize people. So having some people build wealth, have some people not building wealth. So that feels like a policy solution, right? So that takes so much time. And again, I think the work there is the social movement, public will building, right? That's the same kind of work, right? Getting everyone to understand how this is a community problem, not someone else's problem, and what the impacts are when we say you can't be in my backyard and you got to be somewhere else, what that looks like. In terms of other root causes of poverty, I think about the free tax help program and how, essentially it's about getting money into the pockets of the people who need it. And that's at the margin saying, here's the people that have a lot of money and the people that don't, and let's just redistribute that, right? So, but does that address is that dismantling the root cause of why there's people with a lot of wealth and why there's people without that? But it is redistributing it, right? So it's kind of on the edges of it. So I also think about what SparkPoint does and, the connection between financial stability and education. It's kind of our buckets, right? So if you think of housing and basic needs and career and financial stability, like those are kind of the drivers. And each of those have like 50 reasons why the systems don't work like they're supposed to. So it's very hard to articulate this in a way that is like succinct and says, here's the 3 or 4 things we're doing to dismantle it, the 3 or 4 things we're doing to help people live through it. Like, what can we do to just help you get through it right now, understanding that we got to change the big system for the long term, but you just need support right now.
Well, no, I mean, to your point, I think like that's the root causes are down mixed in with all of those reasons. Like, yes, wages need to be better, but also like cost of living has to be controlled in some kind of way. Yes, we need more housing, but also the cost of building housing is like gone crazy for a number of reasons, because we also need that housing to be good housing and sustainable and not just like somebody
and
building a shed somewhere. And and ultimately, after all of that, it comes down to, at least with housing, right? Like that there's not enough of it. So my question is, when you get down to those things, like how are we addressing those? We can help people in college. That helps. That's probably an investment in the future, but it doesn't necessarily ensure that their wages are going to be better once they get out. I don't know. I'm
like, so what are we going to do if we're still here and we want this not to be true?
Yeah.
So I think that is something that the United Way could do. And I think that's partly why it's good for us to be amplifying these messages and sharing what we know about what's happening in community. And I think that's key. And I think that's why people said to us, help us tell people that we need to do something about this, and that they can take action, or they can get involved, or that here's the real problem with housing. I think people think we have an audience that maybe others don't. So I think that's a key component, and that feels small, and it doesn't feel, obviously it's not enough, but I think that's a place to start. I think we have to be on the same page about what the problem is. But I think that is the work. Like, this is it. Like, I keep thinking, like, there's, you're going to, in 2 months, you're going to have this thing, and you're going to be like, okay, now I'm really doing that work of dismantling the root causes of poverty. No, you are doing it by having these conversations and by speaking truth, right, about what the issues are, and having, people discover it and understand it better. And that is the work. It's not somebody else that's doing some fancy thing that feels really impossible. It's every day. So I don't know. I think about that a lot in terms of, if we want to put ourselves out of business, that might be where we have to start. And, and in terms of public policy, that hasn't always been, I think nonprofits generally, so I think we're not alone in this, just recently are more like, yeah, that's the work. I could be running the shelter until the end of time. Right? I have to change the whole thing. So yeah, I think that maybe it's education, information sharing, and it's an unwavering focus on policy, right? Not giving up when it feels like that could go by the wayside. It can't. That is the work that has to continue and is at the core.